I'm gonna get us started. I'm sure we're gonna have people coming and going throughout the day, and all the sessions are going to be recorded, and we'll be sharing them afterwards as well. So yeah, welcome. I'm Cassie, and yeah, I'm just really glad to be able to bring this event to everyone with such an amazing group of speakers. I feel like I do bang on about imagination quite a lot. But I guess over 1,100 people have now signed up for this. And I feel like it is because, you know, people are really looking for a sense of other worlds being possible, and people need something hopeful. And, you know, I really believe we can't navigate through these times without being propelled by very different imaginations. And I think, you know, it's so easy to write off this work as a nice to have, but I think it's really vital work to shift our perspectives, to situate our belief in something alternative. I think it's the sort of soil work of any kind of change. And I guess I work a lot in the funding landscape, and I'm always hopeful and trying to organize funders to nurture more of this work, because otherwise so much of what we're doing is just plaster sticking. It is just making the existing system better. Like this is the groundwork of the change that we need to see. So it's amazing that JRF I've kind of put this on, have invested in this space. It's so different from some of the other work they're doing. I tweeted yesterday, they've got an amazing team today reporting on the budget and, you know, doing some of the immediate crisis work, which, you know, is so vital. And it's really refreshing to see an organization also recognizing that whilst we need to be absolutely dealing with the issues that we have today on a daily basis, they also understand that if we only focus on that, we're never gonna move through these things. So yeah, amazing to JRF for hosting this. So I'm gonna now say hello to Keri and Gabriella. I'm not going to do sort of big introductions because their bio is in the program, but I've loved that, you know, it's been amazing to have them as curators of this event. I think they've both been immersed in both the theory and practice of this work for a long time, with Gabriella sort of pioneering municipal and political imagination in Mexico City in the government there. I mean, as well as being an artist and many other things. And Keri again has been very involved in lots of the sort of futures and foresight community. But I'm really loving the work that Keri's developing around the temporal imagination, of which I'm sure we'll hear more and more. And yeah, it's been a privilege to work with them because I put in my notes, but it's really true. Like every time I speak to either Keri or Gabriella, I feel like my own imagination is expanded. I feel like they open my mind and my heart to like new possibilities. And yeah, so it's been wonderful to have them help bring this to life. So we're going to have a really short conversation. I'm going to ask them both, to talk about why is this so important at this time? Why is this event and all the content of this event really important now?
Hi, Cassie. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm just laughing at the comment in the chat that says, is it intentional that everyone on screen has a black top and a silver necklace? We clearly just have morphed into each other because we've had some really wonderful conversations developing this project. So, it's brilliant that JRF and Cassie, all of her work has come together to make this possible. For me, creating space to talk about the imagination is critically important. I do a lot of work on climate change and long-term futures, and that's a field that's just dominated by facts, models, scientific plans, technological infrastructure. And I think we can see what happens when that sort of work is not informed and shaped by the imagination, by the sense of the possible. I think also we can see what happens when we lose imagination as a faculty of empathy with other people and other practices that allows us to see different parts of the world. I'm also really pleased to be joining today on a day in the UK that is so full of strikes, so many people taking to the streets and saying that another world might be possible. And that to me is really at the heart of why I think the imagination is important. We have to continually remind ourselves that other worlds are possible. I'll pass to Cassie, to Gabriella to say something.
It's such a joy to be in conversation with you both and with everybody joining us today. And I was thinking this morning that this is a thread, I think, that has run across all of my life. My first big love was literature. And I think I lived more in the world of words than I did in the world of people for a long time. So I've always been fascinated by that fluctuating and viscous border between reality and fiction in so many ways. And I think that many times we can pretend, if you will, that they live in their own spaces, but actually there's so much that happens at that troubled and troubling and fluctuating border. So I think it becomes every time more important for us to think precisely everything from the language and the tools that we have on both ends of this thing that we call human life. Like, how are they interacting? What is happening there? And in many ways, as Cassie mentioned, I come from a cultural background. I have been a documentary filmmaker, a visual artist, a journalist, a curator. I've worn several hats. And then when I jumped into government, that seemed to be the craziest, oddest bedfellow for all of the things that I had been doing. It actually turned out to be one of the biggest adventures, perhaps because I had to deal with another really interesting tension, which is my fascination with subjective lives and everything that happens within our personal space, our dreams, actually, our fantasies, our language, the way that we view things, as well as with one of my other big loves that I especially acquired during government, which is public and collective life. And so how do we deal with these tensions? What happens in this in-between space? Is there other ways of thinking of language, vocabularies, tools of what happens in between that becomes much more symbiotic, much more entangled, as Cassie and I have spoken a lot about, much more collective? Is personal imagination different to the collective? Do we actually need other ways of going through it, of thinking, of imagining, actually? And what are the tools to make reality malleable nowadays? So I discovered that policy is one of them. But I also discovered that policy and laws, for example, are not enough, that we really need to focus on those subjective lives and think about, yes, hard data, but how it entangles with things such as political imagination, urban imaginaries, the way that we believe the world works, and then start figuring out different combinations that are possible between them.
Thank you both. And another thing I think would be really good to share in the next sort of 8 minutes that we have is, I guess, sort of talking a bit about why you've curated the sessions as you have, and the people that you've asked to speak, and the themes, but also how it relates to your own work and practice.
Yeah, I mean, well, Gabrielle and I had many and long conversations around all of this, and there are many possible events that could have happened today. Some of them manifested, others we will probably have more in future. I don't know, Gabrielle, do you want to start?
Sure. So this has been, as I mentioned, like incredibly thought-provoking, and will have an influence not only on what we see today, but actually a lot of my work going forward. So I so enjoyed the conversation that we were able to have. And I think one of the fundamental things that Keri and I started speaking about at the very beginning was basically the importance of what type of, if these are exceptional times, so what type of imagination is needed for the times at hand? Because so many times imagination is actually based in the zeitgeist of the moment and the prevailing paradigms. So for example, starting a conversation on everything from like mythic imagination, which seems to have both a way of being deeply engaged with the world as it is, but going beyond it. And it also has all sorts of patches of the enigmatic and the mysterious and the awesome and the awful both, so that you actually have to think and sense with something else. Who, for me, the unimaginable became one of the questions that I really wanted to start us off with, because on one hand, it is becoming every time more difficult to fathom what is coming next. It's becoming every time more difficult to plan towards the future, to think about what we need individually and collectively to start facing these times that are at the edge of a world that we knew, a world between worlds, as we have said. And at the same time, perhaps as Dougal will mention in the unimaginable session, we also need to hesitate a bit. We need to perhaps stay with the trouble, as Donna Haraway would have said, because we're not necessarily in full grasp of what will be needed of us. So we can't rush in the ways that we have rushed into everything else. So that became an incredibly important thing. I also really wanted to be able to ground this in practices across the world. I think this is an international conversation and needs to happen from very different geographies, very different types of imaginings, as Cassie said at the beginning. And then how does this travel through different practices as we go from this mythic imagination to something that is every time more grounded in political and civic imagination, for example, and then also in the day-to-day practices of people that are taking bold ideas and starting to figure out what the relationship is and what happens when these hit the ground. So those I think were some very important things, as well as listening to Keri and what she's been working on as well.
I think one of the things that Gabriella and I talked about early on was about recognizing also the politics of imagination, and particularly imagination infrastructure. This is not too often, if we're not careful, imagination gets thought of as something that just happens in the mind. You know, it's just the sort of imaginary stuff, but there is a politics of imagination. There are societies and cultural practices that shape our imagination. So building our sensitivity to that really is part of what we're trying to do today, is to talk about the politics of the imagination, the infrastructure that's needed to enable it. Another key thing that we talked about was really our starting assumption of who we are in the world. And one of the failures, one of the dominant narratives that structured our imagination is the idea of humans as separate from each other, from the planet, from other beings. And that particular story is so unhelpful to us right now, because it doesn't provide us solidarity or support, and it also doesn't allow us to see the impact and imagine the consequences of what we're doing. And so one of the really key features for today was to surface what we call the ecological imagination, as other people have called it, so that we can recognize ourselves as a starting point for our imagination as interdependent and interconnected with each other. So that was a really key theme. The other key thing that I was particularly interested in is I'm interested in how we think about time and how our stories of time shape our sense of what is possible. And one of the things that I've noticed recently is if in Western modern traditions, we always put possibility into the future, right? It's this thing that's going to happen, this new world will emerge. It constantly defers it, it pushes it further and further away. And so I've been really interested in the emergence of what we might call the field of this possibility studies that has Northern European and Latin American traditions that are coming together to think about how we sensitize ourselves, how we see possibility in the present, in this, what Donna Haraway calls the thick present, I call the richness of the meanwhile. How do we see the richness and the abundance of what's happening at the same time as we develop the kind of political imagination to allow ourselves to say, how do we nurture this? How do we care for it? How do we make this all visible? So it's that sort of intersection between politics, between the ecology, rethinking who we are, reimagining who we are as humans, emerging possibilities, and locating that in existing infrastructure. And I think both Gabriella and I are really interested in saying we're not starting from zero. We've got infrastructures that exist that we can build upon. We can rethink how we use the city. We can rethink. For me, I'm an educator by training, you know, what about schools as resources of imagination infrastructure, museums? So it's something about creating a sense of possibility in terms of what emerges in the present, and also using and reusing and repurposing what already exists. So those are some of the things we were talking about.
And if I may briefly add, in terms of the politics of imagination, one of the the phrases that has my leitmotif, if you will, that has followed me, I think, for 2 decades now, which is crazy, is imagination is not a luxury. And so in many ways, I think we're coming to a point in time, very much as Cassie mentioned as well, where imagination, instead of being seen as this soft, fluffy thing that is, oh, you know, it's the cute thing or the aesthetics of it, we're actually seeing how fundamental it is, because these subjective lives that we believe that perhaps could not hold their space against hard data, for example, or objective reality, is actually what our realities are based on. So if we actually don't glance much deeper into that space of where things are being churned, and as Keri is pointing out, of what do we think what does it mean for us to be human? Where is it that we focus on? Do we take this in between spaces as a thing in and of itself? Are we thinking about the entanglements? There's so many things that get lost in the conversation. So I'd end with thinking, with sharing a reflection, which is, you know, coming undone is not an easy thing. Like, I think we can over romanticize it, but I think anybody who has passed through a deep moment of grief, or where your world has come undone, either individually or in relationship to other people, it is absolutely frightening. And at the same time, there seems to be this moment in life where things will come undone either way. So should we be choosing what we undo, instead of just being pulled into the abyss of a world that can no longer remain the same? So there's a lot of, I think, also quite existential questions, I think, that if we keep each other better company and have these conversations a little bit more publicly, perhaps we can actually retool ourselves for the things to come, and also have a creative ethos that goes into into the edge of the abyss, and then hopefully beyond it as well.
Brilliant, thank you both. Any last final words, and then otherwise I'm going to introduce our host for the day. And also, yeah, so, well, first of all, let's welcome Farah into the room, hopefully. Hello. Before I hand over, I just want to report, I know lots of people are having lots of issues getting in, so I'm sorry if you're one of the people that's arrived a bit late and a bit like frustrated. I think we all need to have grace in our day-to-day around the things that might not quite work straight away, or yeah, we've got an amazing team working on this, but you can never predict some of the things that might not go to plan. So it's really lovely to have Farah here to host the event. Again, I'm not going to do a kind of big introduction because her bio is in the programme. I always feel better whenever Farah is around. So to know that she's going to steward us all through this day, yeah, I can't think of anyone better to do that. I'm going to hand over to you, Farah.
Thanks so much, Cassie, and good morning, everyone. I feel like I've missed the memo about the black top and silver necklace, and I've come with the wrong colors. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning, for taking this time out to be able to stretch your minds and your hearts in different ways. I already feel stretched, and it's only 9:22. There are 11 amazing sessions that have been curated for you all today, and we're going to go up right until 8 p.m. So as Cassie said, I'm hoping to help steward us through this amazing lineup and help make connections across the different offerings that will be shared with us today. Although there's 11 sessions, there's lots of breaks that have been programmed in, as you'll see from the overall schedule, and there's also a lunch break. So hopefully there'll be lots of time for people to stretch their legs, hydrate, and level up on snacks. Before we begin, I just wanted to kind of share a few explanations about the structure of today and how we're hoping that people will engage with the sessions. So there'll be a range of speakers, keynotes, in conversation style presentations, and lightning talks. So hopefully a diversity of formulas and models to keep you engaged and interested in the information that's being shared with you. Unfortunately, the nature of this format of event means that there won't be lots of space for direct interaction and live Q&A. However, and I can see people are already taking up this opportunity, we're hoping that everyone makes really, really active use of the chat. We encourage those of you that are listening live to share reflections, questions, resources, from your own parts in the chat, and we'll collect all of those and share a note from this session. We're also really hoping that we can share those reflections back with all of our speakers. As you can imagine, they can't see you, and I'm sure they'd really appreciate hearing how things are landing for you, what's connecting, what's not, what is linking in with things that you might be doing or things you've seen in other ways. So please do share kind of any reflections on how their words are landing within your hearts and minds. We also recognize that people are joining from lots of different time zones, and that people will drop in and out, and that's absolutely fine. Please do what you need to do to look after yourself. All the sessions will be recorded and shared afterwards. As Cassie has already said, please give us some grace for technical and logistical difficulties. We've got an amazing team that's helping hold all of this space for us today. So please stay flexible and patient around technology. Please let us know in the chat or over email if there's anything that we can support with, but we're all doing our best. And I guess just finally, imagination infrastructure is an evolving and emerging field and an area of work, as well as Keri and Gabriella said, there's lots of history that we're building on. As yet, there's no consensus on terminologies or boundaries of this work, and people interpret and understand different things from this language. A lot of different threads will be pursued. It's not all going to knit up into a neat tapestry, but because we really want to explore the different boundaries of this work and different ideas around it. You're going to hear from a lot of different voices and perspectives today. Some of those will echo the experiences and thoughts that you've already been sitting with, and others will challenge you to reevaluate how you've been thinking of some things, and others still might create some discomfort with the level of unfamiliarity of the topics or some of the things that people are covering. I have no doubt that all of us will walk away from today having been stretched in ways that we wanted, and also in ways that we weren't expecting or maybe didn't want. So I hope you'll lean into those stretches and engage with generosity and curiosity